He is not a crook. This is part, what is it? 7? So foreign interference, okay? And so I'm going to read from the Canada website, okay? So Canada.ca, English, Public Safety, Canada. So this is foreign interference and Canada. Backgrounder. The Government of Canada defines foreign interference, FI, as malign activities undertaken by foreign states or those acting on their behalf to advance their own strategic objectives to the detriment of Canada's national interests. Now, of course, you've got to define Canada's national interests if you add that there. These activities target Canada, Canadians, or Canadian interests and are covert, deceptive, threatening, and or illegal, and threaten all levels of government, the private sector, academia, diaspora communities, and the general public. And they're not always covert. Sometimes they're in plain sight, right? FI poses one of the greatest strategic threats to Canada's national security because it can undermine Canadian sovereignty and social cohesion, diminish Canadians' trust in our institutions, and degrade the rights and freedoms to which all Canadians are entitled. Two examples include threats, harassment, or intimidation by foreign states or those acting on their behalf against anyone in Canada, Canadian communities, or their loved ones abroad, and targeting officials in different Canadian jurisdictions to influence public policy and decision-making in a way that is covert, deceptive, or threatening. And again, that part, if you watch, our politicians having conversations about it, the way that they don't realize they're doing it themselves and violate the first point I mentioned here is apparent, right? It's not covert. They're doing it with the wrong conversations in the wrong way because they're so self-serving in their political goals, right? In their political parties. Because when you add political parties to democracy, as I've stated years ago, you automatically create a division, and you are already threatening Canadian sovereignty. The concept of different tribes or political parties is ridiculous. I think there are better ways, especially with the invent of the internet, and of course journalists saying, okay, according to the internet, you represent these things on these topics, and according to Elections Canada, let's say, you must answer these questions as before elections or after elections on these topics which are current affairs, and you must also update these requests by Election Canada as quickly as possible, because otherwise you are not being a transparent politician, which is a threat to Canadian sovereignty. And of course, Canadians aren't smart enough to demand this or create such change. And even if you mention it to, like I am right now, to Canadian politicians, they're not gonna want more transparency. Okay, if they're already happy with who they think they are, or they're projecting to be, or they actually are, even though it is not enough to be protecting Canadian sovereignty and Canadians, they're not going to make those changes. Is telling you that there are many ways that the wrong conversations or the absence of conversations, including definitions of things and how to interpret them and how to expand on them in a way that you can agree, especially if you're debating whether this foreign interference is coming from the States, and supposedly they use the same language as one of our two official languages here, then it shouldn't be that hard. But it seems to be hard. It seems to be that it's very much stuck a lot of the time in foreign interference being specific only to elections, right? Who was voted in, who wasn't voted in, and how that may or may not have impacted the tribes of the parties, right? And their strengths in government. So again, please, people that are in politics, try to be less politician-centered when you are especially asked questions about Canadians as a whole, and just start kind of maybe showing signs of, high school graduation. I don't want to be too insulting, but it's kind of just read your own definitions here.